Hi there. My name is James Maddison. I'm a consultant at the Open Data Institute. You might know us as ODI HQ, and I'm going to talk about open cities and some of the work that we've been doing over the last couple of years at the ODI. I'm not going to go into too much detail about who we are and what we do as an organization, but we're a vision-driven organization. We want a world where data works for everyone. And we work with companies and governments to build an open and trustworthy data ecosystem in order to make this happen. We very much believe at the ODI that data is kind of integral in creating positive impact. We know that good decisions that lead to positive impacts can only be made when data is stewarded effectively. In other words, collected, maintained, and shared appropriately. Good stewardship of data enables us to create information from that data in the form of products and services, analyses and insights, or stories and visualizations. At each stage, from collection or access of the data to the point of decisions being made, we need to engage with a diverse range of experts to make sure that our decisions are informed by collective experience and understanding. This is especially important in a complex environment like a city, where multiple stakeholders have a vested interest in the decisions being made. Sometimes we can veer away from this positive impact future, and this could be unintentionally or it could be purposeful depending on the organization that's kind of controlling the shift. But when things are done in isolation or organizations decide to withhold data because they perceive the data asset itself to be valuable, it can limit the positive outcomes that we can create through better use of data. We call this the data hoarding future. We believe that openness is the lever that will bring people back towards positive impact through encouraging organizations to innovate and to share data in order to enable others to innovate, by encouraging people to build capability around data, and particularly thinking about data literacy as part of that and how we understand data and its value. And lastly, thinking about building infrastructure to support the way that we access, manage, collect, use, and share data. At the ODI, we very much think of things as being on a spectrum from closed to open. We usually apply this to data, hence why this is called the data spectrum. And we believe that organizations should try and be as open as possible with data while still maintaining and respecting people's privacy. And I think this quite aligns quite nicely with general kind of open principles. So things like open source, things like open government, and we really encourage organizations in any space, in any sector, in any domain, to really think about how being as open as possible could create more positive impact. As I said, we've been working on an open cities focused project for the last couple of years. And we wanted to share with you some of our key findings from the research that we've done and from the interactions that we've had with cities. This mainly comes out of a research report that we wrote where we worked with 4 European cities to understand how they were approaching being open, as opposed to following the kind of smart city narrative with more of a focus on kind of tech-enabled innovation. They're very much thinking about kind of how openness can enable innovation and help you to solve kind of common city challenges. So the first learning is around increasing access to useful data from across the public and private sector. This is probably the thing we're all kind of most comfortable with, or the thing that we talk about most. We believe that cities already have access to a lot of the data that is useful to address problems, but it's just difficult to understand where that data sits within the city and which organizations or stakeholders need to be engaged in order to access that data, in order to solve those big problems. But if we work together with stakeholders and increase access to data, it can help us to collectively address problems that affect many people. Internal skills and motivation within organizations is really important in helping people to be more open, and also helping people to understand the value of data in their particular context, and how that can help them to address problems. We believe that developing internal skills and capability is vital, and that cities should look at how to improve digital capability of their departmental teams. This should be done first and foremost through upskilling staff already working there who have the knowledge of policy and services, but who could benefit from learning more about data and how it applies to their role, as well as kind of technology and digital skills that kind of complement learning about data as well. Large city governments could follow examples like Helsinki, where they've really started to look at injecting skills and literacy training around data into what they do, into their kind of everyday activities. We think developing relationships between stakeholders across a city environment or ecosystem is really important, particularly between private and public sector organizations, as private sector organizations usually hold a lot of really useful data that could help a local authority to address problems. And likewise, I think private sector organizations will often want to get into the good graces or genuinely be able to support cities to work more effectively, because usually that brings with it some sort of economic or business benefit. We've learned that a lot of cities are actively publishing data, making it openly available and encouraging wider use. And it's not so common with the private sector organizations that sit within those cities. When it comes to decision making within a city environment, data held by the private sector has a lot of potential in terms of improving citizens' lives, in terms of helping to deliver better public services. But as we said, if that connect is not there, then it's really difficult for both parties to kind of make value out of the data that already exists within the city context. We really encourage that organizations, whether they be private sector, but particularly local authorities, engage with citizens and technical communities, and usually with a kind of problem focus in mind. Tapping into collective knowledge of citizens and citizen groups can lead to better engagement, better decision making, and better services that people want to use and actually need. Engagement can be done in various ways. In Hamburg, which is one of the cities that we looked at, they use online platforms such as Decidim or Console, or they use like citizen panels in some other cities like Gdansk, where they invite people in to have a conversation about data, but in the specific context of a problem. To maximize the value of this engagement, citizens first need to understand the major issues around the use of data and technology, how that affects them, and cities and city governments can help support citizens by talking to them, by helping to educate them and kind of upskill them in terms of what they know about data, what they know about digital, and what they know about kind of technology as well. Lastly, and personally, what I think is one of the most important points, or one of the most important parts of being an open city, is about learning from others. So it's all well and good within your own city environment, practicing collaboration, publishing open data, and generally kind of being more open. But the real value that I think comes from that is from sharing what you're doing with other cities, learning from what other cities are doing, and trying to integrate the good bits into your own practices. Cities tend to be very different. They have different histories. There are lots of cultural, societal, geographical differences within cities, but this doesn't mean that they can't work together and kind of learn from the challenges and successes that each city has achieved. Our research shows that lots of cities have a lot in common, particularly around the kind of big issues that they're trying to solve, such as the climate emergency or increasing citizens' involvement in political decision making and deciding where the kind of direction of policy goes. So it's really important that cities can learn from each other and see what other cities are doing really well in a particular space. And one of the things that we've started to do in the last few months or so is look at not just how UK cities can learn from each other, but trying to learn from international examples where cities are doing some really interesting stuff around citizen engagement or open data or addressing particular problems. and trying to convene forums of kind of like-minded stakeholders who want to learn from each other. So that's one of the big focuses for us at the moment, is basically enabling those conversations to happen and trying to bring as many stakeholders who have a vested interest in being more open and solving city challenges together. That's pretty much it from me. It was a very quick run through of some of the things we've learned over the last couple of years. I just wanted to share a slide that has the list of resources. We've produced a checklist which talks about scalability and certain things you might want to think about as a city government if you're trying to be more open. So that could be technical stuff, so open source code, for example. It could be the data itself. It could be how to be more collaborative. And it could also be around kind of sharing what you've learned about resourcing, or what your kind of current situation is around resourcing, and how other people can kind of compare that to their situation. We had a whole research and development project around open cities. So if you're interested in that, please go and check out the link, which we can share after the session. And lastly, we wrote a report, as I mentioned, about the 4 European cities that we engaged with, and what we kind of learned from them. It's really interesting, so please do go and read that if you're interested. That's it from me. Thank you very much.
Hi, James. Thanks for that. That was a great summary. I guess it was a quick run through of everything you've been doing around cities and data and the work that ODIHQ have been doing. So thanks very much. Got a couple of questions for you, and I guess you get asked this all the time. How do we make it easier for people to share not just their data, but their company's data as quickly and as openly as possible?
Yes, I guess that's a difficult question for lots of organizations, because they're worried about security, they're worried about protecting, personal data or sensitive data. I think it starts with conversation. Have that conversation with organizations about what data they need from you, or what they're asking for. Let them kind of really define the parameters of what they think they need. And then that helps you to make decisions about what data sets you need to look at, where you might need to focus on anonymizing data, where you might need to set up some governance around how that data is shared, whether that be on a kind of one-to-one basis and putting a sharing agreement in place, or whether that be something more kind of robust, looking at perhaps a third-party institution to help you with that sharing interaction. But it really does start with understanding the problem. What are you trying to address by sharing data in the first place?
And has the pandemic helped people understand that sharing does help?
I think to a degree, we've seen a lot more willingness from citizens, I think, to contribute to helping understand problems. So I think symptom trackers is a good example to point to. We've seen so much engagement with a variety of different symptom trackers across the UK and across the world. And that kind of mass participation is really quite rare outside of like the pandemic situation. So I think from a citizen perspective, people understand that when there's a problem and that data can help, they're willing to contribute. And then I think with organizations, we're also seeing a willingness to try and tackle problems together, and part of that is sharing data.
Okay, we've got a question that's come through on the chat. So there were some great examples of some public-private project funding that came through the ODI a couple of years ago. Are you looking to do something similar in the future?
In everything we do, we try to take more of an ecosystem view. So we're definitely keen, I think, that when we do any piece of work, so when we work in a specific sector, for example, to make sure that we engage with not only the businesses that play an important role in making things happen in that sector, because realistically, things tend to be driven by the private sector when it comes to particular domains, but also engaging with the regulators and the government departments who are responsible for what happens within the sector. engaging with people at a local level. It's all really important, and we try and make sure that that happens whenever we work on a particular project.
Yeah, I think the question might be a little bit more direct. Is will there be some more specific funding for projects that people could apply for?
So if we're talking about kind of stimulus fund type things, I would hope so. It's one of the things that we see a lot of value in. We recently worked with Lloyd's Register Foundation to run one for the engineering space, to kind of help engineering organizations look at how sharing and opening or improving access to data can benefit public safety. And it's a model that I think really works, so we hope so, but there's nothing kind of clearly on the horizon at the moment.
Yeah, thanks, James. And I guess as a final question for me, so the future, you know, what's going to happen? What do you see happening in the next year or so, and then maybe a bit further out?
So I think on the cities front, and maybe the pandemic has kind of really brought this together. I can see a lot more international collaboration happening. Cities, I think, have realized that we've been almost isolated in the way that we've dealt with COVID-19, in the way that a lot of other cities have dealt with it. And really, that's kind of brought to the fore this idea of openness and sharing, and how important it is to make sure that we share learnings and share best practice and work together to solve problems. So one of the things that we're looking at is trying to kind of formalize some of those relationships and create a sort of network or a forum for people to have conversations around open cities. Yeah,
and who knew there was a thing called the web that people could collaborate and share with, you know, man? Yeah,
it's amazing.
It's amazing, yeah. So thanks very much, James. That was fantastic.